So here's what I think about autistic inertia. It's a type of being stuck that can be frustrating as hell. This is a particular thing, a kind of thing, where you can see the thing that you need to do and you actually want to do that thing, and your body responds like that thing is completely unobtainable. The thing is in task jail. You can be sitting 10 feet from the kitchen. You can be thirsty for an hour. And the human operation sequence of standing up, walking over, and filling that glass just won't assemble into usable code, and it certainly won't execute. Autistic people called this thing out, and we gave it a name years before researchers just got around to looking at it. Maybe they had inertia. A lot of us call it autistic inertia. And this episode is about how hard it is to change states, and about how caring about that task, that thing on its own, doesn't actually get you moving. And maybe if you're another neurotype like ADHD, some of these things will resonate for you as well. I really think they might. So I will cover what autistic inertia is and what's going on in the nervous system underneath all of this kind of being stuck stuff. I'll cover things that tend to help, matching them to the specific kind of stuck that you might find yourself in, because autistic inertia has more than one state, and the responses to those states require different strategies, or at least things to try out. So let me paint you a picture, or give you some words at least, of what autistic inertia can look like. First of all, there's the version where you can't start a new thing. Like you're pretty much or completely at rest, and the task or the thing that you need could be right there, and you understand exactly why it's worth doing logically. And the start sequence, the thing, the kick in the butt, just won't fire in you. So people describe being like that, in that kind of state, sometimes for hours at a time. We might be skipping meals when we're in this state, or water, or putting off going to the washroom. All these things are really important, but that string of small movements just won't happen. That feels impossible to us, that part. Like, I'll sometimes remember that I'm trying to drink way more water and way less coffee, and I realize that the water is just over there, but I can't get to it. The sequence to make that thing happen, even though it's really important to me, I value it, is just kind of locked up. So I keep drinking the coffee because I can reach it from where I'm sitting. Then there's the one where you're just deep inside something, and the part of you that's supposed to call time on it, it's disappeared, right? Like it's just gone offline. Because it can look like flow from the outside, what you're doing, but it can also just do that same thing where sleep doesn't matter anymore, food doesn't matter anymore, and every plan that you had for the evening is just getting canceled. And if somebody actually interrupts you in that state, it might be just a very gentle little interruption, but it can feel like incredibly startling. Like I'll actually scream if someone walks into the room while I'm in this kind of state. So this is a difficulty. Both of these things are a difficulty with making transitions, with starting or stopping whatever we're doing. It just doesn't happen. So you might also have a hard time resuming a task after you are interrupted from that task. So perhaps there's some mental stuff going on where you want to avoid that thing. Maybe it's why you don't want to stop doing what you're doing, because you know that after you're interrupted, you're really unlikely to finish that task that you're working on, or it might take a really long time or just a ton of capacity to get back into the state of working on or doing that thing. So stopping it is a risk. And there's often a crash on the other side of inertia. A 2024 study of autistic adults described this as living in extremes, either unable to start or unable to stop, with not much of a middle ground in there. So that matched my experience with this so accurately. It was almost funny, kind of. Okay, maybe not.
But seriously, it's sort of called out a whole lot of my brain wiring for this, and a whole lot more, really. But inertia, difficulty with transitions in general, is ridiculously common for me. I'll get into a state like hyperfocus working on this show, for example, or any of my other shows, basically, editing episodes, writing episodes, figuring out new topics to cover. I love it. This happens all the time because I'm actively working on this project. So when I'm editing, especially, I won't want to get up until I've done a large contained section, mostly because I know I won't get back to it, or maybe even forget to get back to it as soon as I start doing something else. And I'll get that kind of tunnel vision thing that means I won't eat until like 11 p.m. at night. Time will just disappear because this particular task is also positive. So this is a really common one for us. Or I'll just grab something near the desk if it's from a package to eat, and it's probably very unhealthy. I won't do what I described. I won't walk upstairs to find my proper water vessel that I need to drink out of. That's like the only thing I want to drink water out of, and fill it because it's the proper water vessel. You know, you got a proper cup for each beverage, right? Am I right? Okay. Some of you will know what I'm talking about. Anyways, I can't stop until I get to the very end of whatever I'm doing. And there is no importance or urgency or anything applied to whatever else needs to get done. And I should add that the activity doesn't have to be something that you enjoy, which is often what we associate with hyperfocus. This could be something you actually don't enjoy too. Like this could be cleaning the house for me. I hate it. But after I start and finally get started doing that thing, I can't stop until that entire task is done. All of it. And done to a certain standard as well. So when I do get to the end of whatever I'm focused on, I often have to do things like pee so bad that it hurts. Like it hurts. All that coffee I drink without thinking, or the big water vessel, right? I never noticed that at all until the hyperfocus is over, or the task is done, right? And now the signal is sudden and huge. I've never noticed it. Bam, there it is, right? Which is the only kind of thing I can even register in my brain. It has to be a big sensation, those extremes, which is another really common element of this separation between the mind and the body. Now, I've talked a lot about this. Interoception is what it's called, and I'll link to more resources about interoception in the description. I've already done a couple episodes about it.
So what ties all of this together is that space between wanting the thing, wanting to do that thing, and actually doing that thing. You can want the thing if you notice it, like the water, the replying to the email, the weeding your garden, and you can know logically that it's important for your friendship or your health or just keeping the plants aliveness. And the wanting actually doesn't turn into doing these things if you even notice them in the first place. And that's the part other people around you often misread or misunderstand. From the outside, from their perspective, a person that's not moving and not doing stuff looks like someone who has chosen not to do that thing. So a lot of us get kind of called or thought of as lazy or unmotivated, and then we start to carry that thing around and start aiming at that thing at ourselves, perhaps as shame or guilt. It's really unfair, I should add. In the community research out there, many autistic people name this inertia thing as one of the most disabling parts of being autistic. And a big reason is that shame that gets layered on top of this thing for us by other people or ourselves. And it's something that we don't deserve and shouldn't be happening. So autistic inertia is different from procrastination, by the way, even though those two things can actually look pretty similar from the outside. Procrastination usually comes with some kind of task that you would rather avoid, or a more appealing thing that just kind of takes your attention away way instead. And there's often just kind of some kind of relief when you put the thing off because you didn't really want to do it anyways. Now, inertia is different since the relief isn't part of this thing at all. The inertia happens when the tasks that you really want to do, that you want to transition to, the fun ones included, just that doesn't happen. So we can get stuck in doing things that we don't want to do too, where procrastination would have actually been great. Like wanting the task, enjoying or not enjoying, none of this changes anything in autistic inertia. Autistic inertia can affect things like the way we work, from paid work to working on a team around your hobby or even in a social group or something. Relationships can be affected by this thing. It can be stressful, it can be tiring, or you can even get pretty darn dysregulated. As I said, many autistic people find this to be one of our most disabling things to deal with. And to learn why all of this is a thing, why it happens, let's go back to the studio to learn about that.
So let's get into what's going on underneath, because the why, this part, this is what will help make the what to do part make sense. And it also might help you sort out some personalized things for you to try with your brain, because it's all going to be a little bit different for all of us. The simplest way to understand autistic inertia is a difficulty changing between states, like starting something from rest. That is a state change. Right? You're at rest, then you're not going to be at rest, that thing that you're doing. Stopping once you're going, that's a state change. Switching from one task to a different one, task switching, that is a state change. So the word inertia comes from physics, where the body at rest stays at rest and a body in motion stays in motion until something acts on it. So the autistic community borrowed that as an analogy for how the kind of stuck thing feels. And it works well because the transition into or out of the job or task, this is the hard part, even when the task itself is kind of easy. So like grabbing water, right? When you're sweeping the deck. That transition change can be hard, even though both things are kind of easy. So there's a model from autistic researchers called monotropism, and that might also help here. So monotropism is the idea that autistic attention tends to just kind of pool deeply into one channel at a time. When your attention is all in on one thing, that's often where the good stuff lives, right? Like it's really great. The depth and the focus and the real joy of your passion, or what some people might call a special interest. That feeling when you're doing whatever your passion is, that can be immense. So the cost, it really shows up on the edges of this thing, like getting your attention to leave that channel or state that you're in and move to another one is really expensive. And the deeper that you're in that channel of doing that thing, the more it costs to transition, to climb out and do the other thing. So that's one reason that starting is hard when you're resting in a low channel, and stopping is really hard when you're pulled into a kind of a high one. So this thing that I describe here hasn't been proven like scientifically to my knowledge, but a lot of autistic people still recognize themselves in that thing right away, right? I sure did right away. So another thing is the idea of the brain as a prediction machine. This is something I've talked about in other episodes. So your nervous system is running constant predictions about what is coming next based on patterns, the past, so on. And it compares them against what actually happens. So for a lot of autistic people, that prediction system seems to work a little bit differently than in non-autistic brains, because the world is just throwing up more surprise and more things for our brains to reconcile. So one reasonable take, I think, on inertia is that when our system is already loaded with uncertainty, like we have a lot of it, this is something that we're really used to. So the thing that we're doing, the task, our special interest, our passion, whatever it is, whatever thing we are stuck in doing, right? So launching into a transition, this is a moment of really high unpredictability. And so this is something our brain really doesn't want as a result. It doesn't want to do this thing because it can't really predict it. And it's in this thing it can, right? I kind of like looking at it this way because it does seem quite plausible, although, again, it isn't a proven cause of autistic inertia by any means. So that explanation is usually some version of the freeze response in our nervous system. So freeze is some variation of this kind of experience. The body powers down, right? So the energy drops. You might kind of sense a fog, maybe. Any commands, demands on your thinking brain just kind of don't reach the rest of your body. This kind of description is pretty common of freeze, and a lot of us might know something along these lines from the inside, or we at least recognize the brain command just not working when it does come to doing some kind of action. So one more piece, because it's the part that makes autistic inertia worse over time. This is the tasks that you couldn't start. They don't disappear. They don't go away. They sit there. They just kind of pile up. And that pile existing can raise your anxiety, right? And the higher the anxiety makes a lot of things even harder to do, harder to start. And another thing here is that these things pile up because environments demand more transition or more attention or a different pace than our neurodivergent brains were built for. We're often in environments that don't make sense for neurodivergent brains. So experiencing this, say, in the morning, things will pile up, and then that will mean an afternoon where things are kind of stuck and continuing to pile up. And then it's a week, right? So a whole week of this can then compound into something that just seems too enormous and impossible to deal with. Maybe your to-do list might look like that. So the loop is part of why this isn't willpower. This isn't a problem of willpower. It's not something you can just push through. And then pushing harder, that tends to add more pressure to your system. And your system's already pretty jammed by all this pressure. So it's kind of a loop. And it's just exhausting. So if your autistic inertia is really persistent or really severe, it might be extremely dysregulating in some sort of way. You might need some tools that go well beyond what this episode covers. And you deserve real support for this. So the description includes a page of resources where you might find some assistance that is a better fit. Autistic people described all of this stuff in our own community spaces back in the 90s on some of the very first Autistic Run mailing lists, in fact, well before the research caught up and was added to this particular conversation. Autistic people named this pattern from our lived experience first. And that's often how it goes in our spaces, even if our voices are often excluded from the research. But our voices should always be part of designing and executing that research. Nothing about us without us, right? Plus, we're often really good at research.
So before we get to the point of figuring out what helps, it's worth being able to tell which kind of autistic inertia version of stuck you're in, because the types need pretty different responses to help you. I want to do this in a way that doesn't depend on reading sensations in your body on some kind of cue, because a lot of us can't do that on demand or at all for the most part in any part of our lives, but especially during the autistic inertia state. Plenty of autistic people, including myself, have low interoception and or alexithymia that we're dealing with, where there's a lot happening inside and naming it is the hard part, or even noticing it. So treat what I'm about to offer here as just a fleet of options, and whichever one you can actually access is a good one to try out and see if it works for you. Now, one way to check in, and it's quite accessible usually, is looking at the situation itself, kind of like from a high-level view perhaps. If you can look at what's happening quite literally, like you're stalled out in front of something you haven't started yet, or if you're just like kind of locked into something you can't stop doing, just getting that data alone, what's actively happening, usually tells you what kind of inertia you're in. Now, if you want a second indicator, you might notice the speed inside your body. This could be the pace of your thoughts and your mind, too. So, body or mind. For some people, the just can't start state of things generally runs kind of slow. It might be a little bit foggy. And this can't stop state runs really fast and kind of narrow or intense. For other people, it could be the reverse of these things, or it doesn't show up as speed at all. There's no universal thing here, so the work is matching your own signals to your own states and potentially picking up on a pattern that you notice when you get into these states. Now, my things won't be your things, so you might want to track your energy, your own energy in whatever state, or how loud or quiet it is on the inside, or what your hands are doing, or whether a stim has sped up or stalled out. Many of us read quite reliably off a smartwatch, or like getting a heart rate number, and that can be useful as well. So whichever channel you can actually check in on is the right one for you. And a quick note that sometimes how safe you feel where you are or who you're with can kind of affect if you even can let yourself notice these things. So just something to keep in mind.
So, some of the standard advice doesn't work for some of us, and processing the why behind this kind of lackluster advice is what can lead us, specifically, each of us, to a better solution that fits our own individual needs. So, common advice I've read in this space is just start small or break it down into steps. Now, the trouble with this advice is that breaking a task into steps is itself a planning task, and planning is often exactly the thing that's kind of jammed or locked up or stops a lot of us in our tracks. So, if you hand someone experiencing inertia more steps to organize or like another demand, and you've added load to a system that's already stalled by a load, that might not help. So make a list or to-dos has the same problem as this. The list becomes one more thing you can't start, or the one thing you have to access or do, which is part of the issue to begin with. Like I said earlier, my to-do list is super long, so going in there is something I want to avoid. So then there's the just push through it, right? Which is something that can work for maybe a one-off, but it tends to like backfire as a general strategy because pushing adds more pressure. And that pressure is part of what's kind of just freezing our nervous system in the first place. So the can't stop side of things, this is when you're locked into a task and you need to task switch, which is maybe my most common one personally. You might see things like set an alarm, right? External, that's good. It's a deeply pooled brain, like you're in that deep, deep pool, right? That channel, right? And that brain that's in that deep channel is going to silence and forget about that alarm in a second. So you either don't notice it, like I'll literally turn off the alarm without noticing. Sometimes I even have to go back and check, like, why did my alarm never go off? It's not working. I did it wrong, right? And then I discovered, no, the alarm worked. It was me that didn't work, right? Like I didn't even notice myself. I didn't notice the alarm at all. Or you might actually notice it and then you just go back to what you're doing and you forget and like immediately almost. So none of these things are actually matched to what's going on, or at least what I find useful, which is why it doesn't help some of us. So now to what actually helps, or maybe some new ideas to try out. And I'll try to sort them by what kind of inertia or stuck we're talking about. So it's important to differentiate these things, because the thing to try that will possibly work for one of them can sometimes make the other type of inertia actually worse. So we do want to pick a solution that has a greater chance of potentially working. So to start, the thing where you just can't start, right? You might be sitting on the couch and you don't want to get up and do the thing. You're stuck at the rest side. So the single thing that I come back to the most is body doubling. So this is where you work or you just do anything alongside another person. They could be in the room or it could be virtual. This can even work if you just go to a space with other people present, like a library or a cafe or something, and the other person doesn't help you. They aren't managing you. You don't even need to interact. They don't even need to look at you. I'll go to virtual ones of these things and go off to another part of the house and get my thing done and then come back to check in at the end. So they're just there, the other person. They're present. They're doing their own thing. You aren't being perceived while you're working if that's something you dislike. Again, I have like such an intense version of being perceived while I'm working, and body doubling for me is fine. It's for me. Because so maybe it'll work for you, but we're all different. So anyways, I started doing this before I even knew it had a name, just to get assignments I really, really disliked done for school decades ago. It was the only way I'd get them done, was if I went to the library and just kind of had other people generally in the space. So for a lot of autistic and ADHD people, body doubling in some capacity lowers the cost of starting in a way, for me, that functions better than a to-do list. Heck, sometimes I will body double just to start managing or looking at my to-do list, and then I actually can. And I can find that I can actually start using my list in this scenario when I've been avoiding that to-do app all morning long. All right, so the mechanism seems to be something about another nervous system in the space with you, a bit of sort of co-regulation, as it's called. So and it doesn't have like any of the pressure, like a demand or some kind of push that might make these things backfire. So another resource for this is by using asynchronous body doubling. This can be in podcasts or YouTube videos that are offered as a resource. They are free. They're also not dependent on any schedule or having access to people. And sometimes any podcast will work too. Just having a voice, that sometimes works for me. And it can kind of get me out of my head a little, just that voice, and then I can get the thing started. Another thing that can help is, instead of breaking down a task into those smaller pieces, which is more of a demand, is to give yourself real permission. This is sometimes the hard part of believing yourself that you're giving the permission to just do some of that thing. Like a real cliche example of this is washing one dish instead of the whole sink of dishes. So your nervous system might be responding to the size of the demand. So making it smaller is sometimes a transition that works. But the thing is you're not breaking it down into small tasks. You're just allowing yourself to do one little piece. So maybe you don't continue the dishes after that one thing, but it gets you moving to another task you need to get done. So you are allowed to stop. And then, you might find that you don't stop, and the permission to stop was enough for your nervous system to actually do the whole task. So you might finish that sink of dishes after all. But again, the permission is often the hardest part of this, because a lot of us know it's a lie. So unless we really work on really being honest, you can legitimately say no. That's part of this task. You really have to work on allowing yourself to just do one dish, that the permission is valid. So the third one to try out is environmental. So you put the thing in your path. So like for me, if you have to take a pill in the morning, the pill sits out right next to the kettle, because I know I'm definitely always making my coffee in the morning. So it's right in my line of sight. I have to take the pills for an injury right now. The bottle is leaning against the tap. It's the first thing I do in the morning. That's when I need to take the pill. And it's also there when I go to bed, when I need to take a second one. So this also might be like in the pocket of your clothes that you lay out, wherever you know that you're guaranteed to notice. This removes the planning and the searching and the deciding. It removes adding it to to-do list, which might be unobtainable. This is sometimes the executive load that will kind of stall things. The demand on the nervous system is just too much. So you're letting the environment just do most of that work for you instead. So the fourth thing, this is for monotropic attention specifically, is sensory bridging. So a familiar podcast, a familiar playlist, a comfort show that you've seen 100 times. Sometimes running these things in the background can help you so you can kind of cross from resting into the task using these comfort playlists or comfort shows or whatever. So I have a playlist for this. It's in all caps. It's called You Can Put This on Loop. And it's filled with what I call my stim songs. So they're some of the only things that don't draw too much of my focus away from work. So I can do this kind of thing with these particular songs on this list. Sometimes I'll put one of the songs on a single loop, just one song on loop, so I can work, and it works really well for this particular thing. So the familiarity here, that's what's giving your attention an easier way into the task to start it, so it doesn't have to just hot swap from like cold from one task to cold another task. So it just kind of bridges it over. Now I'll call this out because it probably needs to be called out. Sometimes a screen, like going to your phone to put on that playlist, that special playlist, can kind of suck you into something else. So you might want to build a system around this if you need to, like use a device that doesn't suck you in. Or there's sometimes controls that you can put on your phone to only allow you to use certain things. Big shortcut so you can't see the other apps, whatever.
So now the can't stop side of things. This is where you're sucked into a task and you can't switch, right? So this needs close to the opposite kind of action. So here the internal signal that you have is supposed to say something like it's time to stop doing this thing and move on, and that thing is not working. So usually the stop signal has to come from something outside you because it's not working internally. So an alarm. Now that might not work, right? Because you can silence that. That's not going to manage this thing. Same thing as you could stop, even if you do notice the alarm, you might stop it and then you don't even notice, you don't remember, you go right back to doing whatever you think you were doing and you forget. So a person, a human being, to check in on you can often function a little bit better. So this is body doubling again, but it's a little bit different. It has a little bit of a different job. This is someone who can at least interrupt that lock-in state. And an environmental cue can also work. So if you don't have someone to check in on you, you might want to put something like a light on a timer, something across the room, something that you have to get up and walk to, perhaps. And an inadvertent version of this I had was I got a new chair for my sciatica and it gets really uncomfortable after a few hours. It's really good for my posture, but not good for my butt. So I have to stand up because it's a really hard chair. And now that's pretty good for me health-wise as well, but it also helps me change state. It's a little bit of a signal. It forces me to get up and change what I'm doing at least a bit. Now, I know this is not something many of you can access. Buying a new chair is not an option for everyone, but this is instead an example of a solution, a very custom, unique, just for you solution that I came across inadvertently. So think about creative things that you might want to try or swap out or something and see if something like that will work for you. When you genuinely can't tell which side you're on, and that can happen a lot depending on what the circumstance is, you might want to choose to go with a move that's safe either way. This is something that's quite low demand, that doesn't ask you to figure out your inertia or figure out how you feel or where you feel it. So most of these are just to orient yourself into the space that you're in. You can, for example, name a few things that you see. You could feel where your body meets the chair. You might take your hands and push them flat against against a desk or a wall or maybe your lap for a moment. Whichever of these that you have the capacity to do, whichever ones your body can do in that moment can help you. These things are small, but they're in the present. They're in the present moment, and they don't ask too much of your system because your system probably doesn't have a whole lot of capacity to give in that moment. They can sometimes soften a stuck state just enough that the next thing you do, the thing that you kind of try to transition to, becomes something that might be accessible. And they can work for either of these types of inertia. I also have a regulation practice episode. I have several, I have multiples on the podcast feed. Just look for the ones that are marked as regulation practice at the beginning. And these are in that same space that you can follow along to if you choose to do this kind of practice. They're only about 5 minutes long, and I also add adjustments within them for various neurotypes.
So a couple of these things work better with other people, like body doubling. I guess that's kind of obvious. But this can also take the form of coaching and group sessions. These also might be helpful for you because some of these can resolve more easily when you know that you're not doing it alone. Or you might discover a strategy or just new things to try through conversations with other people about this. So understanding inertia, that's a big part of this, just like building your own unique personal versions of a response to the inertia. This is what fits your life and your brain and your particular type of inertia that you're dealing with. So if there's one thing that I'd want you to take from this episode before I go, it's that the inertia is a state, and states do change, even when they don't change on command, or even when there's internal or external demands that aren't quite working for you. So all of this says nothing about who you are as a person. So the shame is the part of all of this that keeps you kind of fighting with your body. And the shame sort of is operating on some kind of story about laziness that was never an accurate story about what's actually happening. So that's it for this one. This is Wired Divergent, and I'm Jen deHaan. If you want help building this thing into your own life, I run coaching and group programs for neurodivergent brains over at jendehaan.com. So you'll also find a newsletter, written versions of these episodes, and a whole bunch of other resources there. There's a guided practice on the podcast that pairs with this episode, and they're all offered alongside these main episodes. And if you're listening on the podcast, all of this is on a YouTube video as well. Bye for now.